Flight crew mocked a black CEO struggling on crutches. What they didn't know was his lawsuit was already filed. What happens next will leave you speechless. You must join our channel and hit subscribe, because only those who believe no black CEO should be mocked for his challenges will do it before this story begins. Jonathan Briggs eased himself into the plush first-class seat, his crutches resting heavily against the armrest. The familiar hum of the airplane's engines filled the cabin, but beneath the routine atmosphere, a subtle tension seemed to coil quietly in the air. Jonathan's face was calm and composed, but his mind was sharp and restless. The accident from just weeks ago still weighed on him, a broken leg that had forced him to rely on crutches, but had not broken his spirit. He winced slightly as he shifted his weight, wincing at the dull ache in his injured leg. Despite the pain, his resolve was unwavering. The business conference behind him had been intense, and tomorrow's negotiations could make or break Asterion Dynamics, the tech startup he had built from the ground up. The cabin lights cast a soft glow over the rows of passengers settling in for the flight, but Jonathan's attention was caught by the subtle glances of the flight crew as they moved past him. Whispered voices floated faintly, barely audible over the cabin murmurs. Jonathan's eyes flicked toward the group of attendants clustered near the galley, their heads tilted slightly, lips moving in hushed tones. His crutches, a stark reminder of his vulnerability, seemed to have drawn unwanted attention. He caught one of the attendants, a young man with sharp eyes and a forced smile, glancing toward him before quickly looking away. Jonathan's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He understood exactly what was happening. The simple fact that he was using crutches had already become a focal point for judgment. Jonathan's thoughts briefly wandered back to the incident that had caused his injury, a heroic moment when he'd leapt in front of a child darting into traffic, taking the brunt of an oncoming car. No one on this plane knew the story behind his broken leg, and that anonymity both frustrated and fueled him. He reminded himself to stay polite and professional. Anger would not serve him here. His objective was clear: get home safely, prepare for tomorrow's critical meeting, and close a deal that could secure the future of Asterion Dynamics. As the flight attendants moved through the cabin, their whispered exchanges became more noticeable. Jonathan's gaze met that of another crew member, older, with a practiced air of authority but a faint smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. The smirk vanished as quickly as it appeared, but the undercurrent of disdain lingered. Jonathan's grip on his crutches tightened slightly, though his expression remained composed. He forced himself to breathe steadily, aware that his calm exterior was the only shield between him and whatever judgment or mistreatment might come next. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Briggs, would you like some water before takeoff?" Jonathan looked up to see a flight attendant standing beside him, a young man with neatly combed hair and a rehearsed smile. The question seemed routine, but Jonathan sensed the subtle hesitation in the attendant's tone, a flicker of uncertainty behind the professional facade. "Yes, thank you," Jonathan replied, his voice firm but courteous. The attendant nodded and moved away, but the brief interaction only underscored the silent divide between Jonathan and the crew. He could feel eyes lingering a moment longer than necessary, whispers starting again once backs were turned. There was a palpable divide, invisible yet deeply felt. Jonathan's mind raced. He had faced countless challenges as CEO, but this felt different. It was a battle fought not on business floors or in boardrooms, but in quiet moments like this, in the wary looks, the whispered comments, the small but sharp edges of prejudice. He reminded himself that this fight was just beginning, that the crutches were more than just a support for his leg. They were, unknowingly, the first marks in a much larger struggle. He looked out the window at the fading light of dusk, the cityscape blurring beneath the plane's wings. Tomorrow's negotiations were vital, and he needed to focus, to prepare. But deep down, Jonathan sensed the simple crutches he relied on today would become far more than just tools of healing. They would become a battlefield, a stage for a confrontation far beyond what he could see in this moment. He had no idea the simple crutches would become a battlefield of pride and prejudice. The cabin's quiet hum was suddenly pierced by a series of hushed, snickering voices. Jonathan's sharp ears caught the unmistakable tone of mockery slicing through the usual background noise of the first-class cabin. He glanced sideways, catching sight of a small group of flight attendants gathered near the service cart, their eyes darting toward him with barely concealed amusement. They whispered just loud enough for each other to hear, but not for the rest of the passengers. "They're talking about me," Jonathan thought, tightening his grip on the crutches. His heart sank, but his face remained composed, a practiced mask honed from years of leadership in the corporate world. Riley, the tallest among the attendants, leaned in with a smirk and said in a low, sarcastic voice, "Look at him, hobbling around like a wounded pup. A CEO like that, he won't last in business long." The others chuckled, their laughter dry but cruel. Jonathan's breath hitched momentarily, but he refused to react openly. Pride held him back, knowing any sign of upset would only fuel their disdain. Inside, though, frustration and anger boiled beneath the surface. He could feel the sting of their words like sharp needles pricking at his dignity. It wasn't just the physical pain of his broken leg. This was something deeper, a brazen disregard for his humanity, reduced to a subject of ridicule. As Riley tossed out another biting remark, this time mockingly offering, "Hey, maybe you want a wheelchair, Mr. CEO? We can get you one right now." His tone was cold, lacking any genuine concern. The suggestion was a sneer, a way to belittle rather than assist. Riley's eyes glinted with contempt as he looked Jonathan up and down, clearly seeing weakness where there was none. The other attendants joined in with similar snide comments, some mimicking the sound of a wheelchair's wheels with their tongues, others exchanging knowing glances that made the small group's cruelty feel like a dark cloud hovering just above Jonathan's head. Jonathan's mind raced, not with words to fight back, but with the memory of why he was on crutches in the first place. That day, a few weeks prior, he had acted without hesitation to shield a small child from a speeding car in a crowded city street. The impact had shattered his leg, but it had also saved a life. This truth was a private victory he carried silently, a stark contrast to the ignorance and mockery he faced now. The flight attendants had no way of knowing that behind the limp was a story of courage and sacrifice, a testament to his strength rather than a symbol of frailty. Around him, the other passengers remained oblivious to the subtle storm unfolding just a few feet away. Their attention was focused on magazines, devices, or their own conversations. No one noticed the quiet hostility simmering among the crew, or the way their laughter cast a shadow over Jonathan's otherwise hopeful journey home. The rich scent of freshly brewed coffee and the faint hum of air conditioning filled the cabin, but Jonathan felt the air grow colder around him, thick with unspoken prejudice. His resolve hardened. He would not allow this humiliation to define him. Instead, it became fuel for a quiet but fierce determination. If the crew saw weakness, they were mistaken. What they failed to understand was that beneath his injury lay a resilience forged through years of trials, battles, and hard-won success. He was a man who had faced adversity head-on and refused to be broken by it. Jonathan's fingers tightened briefly on the handle of his crutch. His jaw clenched. His eyes scanned the cabin, searching for any sign of support or understanding, but finding none. Still, he held himself tall, refusing to let the cruel whispers steal his dignity. The moment stretched taut with tension, as if the slightest movement could tip the fragile balance between patience and confrontation. Yet, Jonathan remained silent. He understood the power of discretion. This was not the time for confrontation. It was a test of endurance and strategy. Each laugh, each sneer, each dismissive glance was a brick in a wall he intended to dismantle, not with anger, but with proof and justice. They saw weakness where only resilience stood, he thought bitterly, knowing the battle ahead would be far from over. The flight attendant's cruelty was a sharp prelude, a warning of the storm gathering on the horizon. But Jonathan was ready, even if they were not. Mid-flight, Jonathan's body ached with each movement, but the urgent need to reach the restroom was undeniable. Carefully shifting his weight onto his crutches, he straightened his back and called out quietly, "Excuse me, could someone assist me to the restroom, please?" His voice was calm but firm, carrying the quiet authority of a man used to commanding rooms, not begging for help in tight airplane aisles. Riley, the same flight attendant who had earlier made snide remarks, glanced over with a smirk barely concealed. Beside him, two other attendants exchanged glances, their faces twisting with amusement that was anything but professional. Instead of moving immediately to help, Riley sighed exaggeratedly and muttered, Yeah, 1 sec," the sarcasm dripping from every syllable. The other attendants snickered quietly, their eyes flickering between Jonathan and each other like predators sizing up prey. Jonathan's frustration surged beneath the surface, but he kept his composure. He had endured worse, and this moment wasn't about a scene, it was about gathering proof, about exposing the ugliness masked behind forced smiles and hollow politeness. With every passing second, The delay grew heavier, the cabin atmosphere thickening with silent complicity. Passengers nearby cast uneasy glances, some whispering to their neighbors, but no one stepped forward. The cruel spectacle played out in near silence, except for the faint chuckles and whispered mockery from the crew. "Come on, it's not like you're actually hurt," Riley said under his breath, loud enough for Jonathan to hear but too quiet for most passengers. His tone was mocking, as if Jonathan's injury was an act staged for attention. Jonathan's mind raced as he balanced on his crutches. He recalled the fall, the moment when he had thrown himself between a speeding car and a child in danger, the snap of his leg breaking the silence of that chaotic afternoon. That pain, that sacrifice, was invisible to the people before him. They saw only a man struggling, not a man who had fought to protect another. He tightened his grip on the crutches, his knuckles whitening. Despite the discomfort radiating through his leg, Jonathan refused to let their cruelty strip away his dignity. Still, inwardly, he catalogued each moment, the sneers, the delaying tactics, the whispered jabs. He committed names to memory. Riley's sardonic smirk, the lazy posture of the other two attendants, the way they exchanged those looks like a secret language of disdain. The cabin's dim lighting reflected off the polished surfaces of the overhead bins as Jonathan attempted to maneuver through the narrow aisle. His crutches clicked rhythmically against the floor, each sound punctuating the tense silence. His movements were careful, deliberate, but slowed by the crew's lack of urgency. It felt like an obstacle course designed to test not just his body, but his resolve. "You really think you can sue us for this?" one of the attendants whispered to Riley, a low chuckle escaping. Their laughter was thin, brittle, as though they reveled in Jonathan's struggle, blinded by their own arrogance. Jonathan heard it all. Every word, every snide remark, every subtle denial of his right to dignity. But what they didn't know was that this was exactly the moment he had prepared for. Before boarding, he had enlisted the help of one of the city's top legal firms. Quietly, methodically, he was collecting the evidence needed to dismantle a system that hid prejudice behind scripted smiles. His objective had shifted subtly but decisively. No longer was this about simply reaching the restroom unassisted. It was about building a case, brick by brick, against the systemic disrespect he faced. He understood the power of silence in such situations. By not reacting outwardly, he was forcing the crew to reveal their true nature, captured piece by piece on his discreet recordings. A faint buzz vibrated in his pocket, a message from Daniel Crane, his lawyer. It was a reminder, a reassurance that the strategy was sound, that justice was within reach if he stayed steady. Jonathan's breath hitched slightly as he balanced on his crutches and finally reached the aisle leading to the restroom. The space was cramped, the fluorescent light buzzing faintly overhead. A small nod to himself signaled a private victory. He had overcome this immediate hurdle, but the battle was far from over. Around him, the crew's laughter and mocking glances continued, a harsh reminder that this was no isolated incident, but a symptom of a deeper rot. Yet Jonathan felt a strange calm wash over him. Beneath the physical pain and the emotional strain, a quiet strength had begun to grow. He glanced down at his crutches, their worn grips a symbol not of weakness, but of survival. This moment was a turning point, not just in the flight, but in a fight that stretched far beyond these narrow aisles. As Jonathan steadied himself near the restroom door, his mind resolved to turn every insult, every delay, every whisper into fuel for change. The humiliation was his to carry for now, but the lesson he intended to deliver would be one of respect, accountability, and justice. In silence, he was already building his case. The plane lurched suddenly as turbulence rippled through the cabin, jolting passengers in their seats and sending a low murmur of unrest through the first-class section. Jonathan gripped his crutches tightly, steadying himself against the sudden movement, his breath catching momentarily in his throat. Just as he began to regain his balance, Lucas, one of the flight attendants, appeared abruptly beside him, maneuvering through the cramped aisle with a tray in hand. Without warning, Lucas collided with Jonathan, causing him to stagger dangerously, nearly losing his footing on the polished floor. Instead of a quick apology or helping hand, Lucas's lips curled into a smirk, eyes glinting with thinly veiled contempt. "Watch where you're leaning, CEO," he said with a biting edge, his voice dripping with derision as he straightened, not bothering to mask the scorn that radiated from him. Jonathan's heart hammered against his ribs, a flush of anger and humiliation rising within him. This was the moment his patience, long stretched thin, finally snapped. His voice, firm and unwavering, cut through the tense atmosphere. I expect to be treated with respect. I am not some inconvenience to be brushed aside." The words hung in the air, sharp and resolute. Around them, the other attendants exchanged uncomfortable glances, their facade of professionalism faltering for a split second. The cabin was thick with silent tension, passengers sensing something more than just the usual flight discomfort. Above the low hum of the engines, the captain's calm voice came over the intercom, steadying the nerves of those aboard. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We appreciate your understanding." His words were a balm to many, but Jonathan felt no relief. The crew's undercurrent of hostility remained a suffocating presence. Beneath the veil of strained civility, Jonathan pulled his phone quietly from his jacket pocket. He recalled the advice from Daniel, his lawyer, ringing in his mind. Document everything. Every slight, every disrespectful word. His fingers trembled slightly but moved deliberately, starting to record the crew's behavior without drawing attention. The flicker of the screen illuminated his determined eyes as he caught Lucas muttering under his breath with a sharp tone that was barely audible but heavy with contempt. This evidence would be crucial, a weapon forged not in anger, but in patient resolve. Nearby, a man seated several rows back observed the scene with keen interest. Marlin, a retired judge known for his discerning gaze and quiet strength, sat composed yet alert. His eyes narrowed slightly as he watched Jonathan's struggle, sensing the storm brewing beyond the confines of this flight. Marlin's years on the bench had taught him that injustice often lurked in the smallest, seemingly inconsequential moments, and that sometimes justice waits in the wings, watching. As the plane began its slow descent toward the airport, the cabin was filled with a quiet tension that seemed to settle over Jonathan like a heavy fog. His breathing was steady but tight, each movement on his crutches deliberate and measured. The exhaustion from the long flight, combined with the strain of the countless small humiliations he'd endured, weighed on him like a stone. Yet beneath it all, an unshakable fire burned, an unyielding resolve that no amount of sneering laughter or whispered mockery could extinguish. Jonathan's eyes scanned the rows of seats with quiet scrutiny. The flight attendants he had noticed earlier, the very ones who had dismissed his pain and mocked his injury, were now exchanging hushed words, their faces a mix of unease and defensiveness. They were unaware that Jonathan's legal team had already set the wheels in motion. A complaint had been filed minutes after the flight took off, and the airline's management would soon be dealing with more than just a passenger grievance. The irony was not lost on Jonathan. The crew thought their whispered remarks were harmless, but little did they know they had awakened a storm. A few rows ahead, a shadow moved softly through the cabin aisle. Marlin, the retired judge who had watched the unfolding drama with quiet concern, now approached Jonathan with a steady, measured pace. His face was lined with years of experience and wisdom, his eyes reflecting both empathy and the weight of many battles fought behind courtroom walls. Marlin's presence was a balm, a rare and unexpected source of strength amid the turmoil. "Mr. Briggs," Marlin said quietly as he came to a stop beside Jonathan's seat, lowering his voice to avoid attracting attention. His tone was calm but resolute, carrying the assurance of someone who had seen injustice and stood firmly against it. "I've seen cases far worse than this, and I can tell you, you're not alone in this fight. If you need support, I'm here." Jonathan looked up, meeting Marlin's gaze. There was a brief flicker of relief in his eyes, a recognition that someone understood the gravity of what he was facing, someone willing to stand with him. "Thank you, Judge. That means more than you know," Jonathan replied, his voice low but firm. He adjusted his grip on the crutches, feeling the sting of pain shoot through his broken leg, yet it was overshadowed by the surge of determination swelling inside him. The cabin hummed softly with the sound of passengers preparing for landing, overhead bins being closed, seatbelts clicked, and murmurs of anticipation rising. Yet beneath these everyday noises, Jonathan sensed something deeper, a shift in the atmosphere. This flight, this moment, had transcended its ordinary purpose. It was no longer just a journey home. It had become a battleground for dignity, respect, and justice. As the plane touched down with a gentle but definite thud, Jonathan's mind raced ahead. He envisioned the days to come, meetings with his legal team, press conferences, court hearings, and the personal toll it would exact. But most importantly, he imagined the ripple effect this case could create, challenging not just a single airline but the systemic prejudices embedded within the corporate world and beyond. Despite the pain in his leg and the exhaustion etched into every fiber of his being, Jonathan pushed forward. He rose carefully, balancing on his crutches as he prepared to disembark. Around him, passengers stirred, some casting curious glances, others avoiding eye contact altogether. The flight attendants shifted nervously, no longer emboldened by mockery but subdued by the invisible weight of accountability now looming over them. As Jonathan made his way down the aisle, the murmur of whispered conversations followed him, quiet speculations about the man who had endured so much yet carried himself with unwavering pride. When he reached the exit, he paused briefly, inhaled deeply, and looked back at the cabin, the stage of his quiet yet powerful stand. With a steady step, he crossed the threshold of the plane, his crutches tapping softly against the jetway floor. His posture was erect, his expression resolute. He was no longer the subject of ridicule or derision. He was a force to be reckoned with. He was done being the punchline. Now, he would be the verdict. Jonathan sat rigidly in his leather office chair, the familiar hum of the city far below his floor-to-ceiling windows unable to distract him from the storm brewing inside his mind. The fatigue from his broken leg still lingered, but it was his mounting frustration and determination that kept him upright and sharp. Without a moment wasted, he had called Daniel Crane, the lawyer he trusted most, and now the two men sat across from each other, the sleek glass conference table between them reflecting the steady, purposeful tapping of Daniel's pen. Daniel was a tall man in his late 40s, his face lined from years of battling corporate giants and systemic injustices. His voice was calm but firm as he laid out the daunting path ahead. Jonathan, airline companies are notorious for deflecting blame, especially in cases like this. They'll call it customer service or misunderstandings, but rarely will they admit to discrimination outright. Jonathan's jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on the neatly organized folder Daniel slid across the table. Inside were the recordings Jonathan had captured on his phone, the low murmurs of mockery, the dismissive tones, the moments when the flight attendant's cruelty crossed the line. There were also witness statements, including a letter from Marlin, the retired judge on the flight who had offered to testify about what he saw. The evidence was compelling, but Jonathan knew it was just the beginning. "I understand," Jonathan said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of exhaustion and resolve. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about what this means for anyone who's been treated like a second-class citizen because of their race or disability. We need to make sure this case sets a precedent." His fingers drummed quietly on the folder, each tap a beat in the rhythm of his determination. Daniel nodded, leaning forward slightly. "Exactly. We're aiming not only for compensation, but for real change. Training programs, policy overhauls, accountability measures. If we succeed, this will ripple far beyond this one flight." Jonathan allowed himself a brief moment to breathe. The physical pain from his injury throbbed beneath the surface, but his mind was sharper than ever. "I want this fight. I want justice, but I'm aware the road will be tough." Outside his office, at the headquarters of Skyward Airlines, a starkly different scene unfolded. A crisis team assembled around a glossy, oval table in a high-rise conference room bathed in fluorescent light. The atmosphere was thick with tension and calculated concern. Executives and PR consultants exchanged guarded glances as they parsed through reports of the incident and the rising social media storm. "We need to contain this before it spirals," one senior executive said, his voice clipped and wary. "This started as just a complaint, but with the recordings going viral, it's becoming a major liability." A PR specialist tapped on her tablet, projecting graphs showing the surge in public outrage and negative sentiment. "The narrative is shifting fast. If we don't respond decisively and transparently, this could snowball." Another voice, colder and more strategic, interrupted. "Transparency is dangerous. The less we admit, the better. We focus on customer service improvements, issue a generic apology, and hope the public moves on." The room fell into heavy silence for a moment. The weight of denial and damage control clashed against the growing call for accountability. None wanted to admit the possibility of systemic problems within their own ranks. Back in his office, Jonathan stared out at the cityscape again, thinking of the contrast. His own fight was against an invisible fortress, policies masked as service, prejudice hidden behind smiles. But he refused to back down. Daniel glanced at his watch, breaking the tension. "Jonathan, we'll need to prepare for a lengthy battle. Expect resistance, legal maneuvering, and attempts to discredit you. But we have something powerful, truth. And with Marlon's testimony, plus the recordings, we're already building a strong foundation. Jonathan met Daniel's gaze, the fire in his eyes unwavering despite the weight on his shoulders. Then, let's get to work. No more waiting. This has to be about more than just me now. As the city lights flickered on outside, Jonathan's office felt colder but sharper, filled with the electric charge of purpose and impending conflict. Every step forward would be a challenge, but he was ready to walk that path, crutches and all. They thought this was just a complaint. They were wrong. Jonathan's story quickly gained momentum the moment the PR firm released the carefully crafted statement. The press release hit the internet like a shockwave, highlighting not only Jonathan's personal ordeal, but the broader systemic issue of discrimination against disabled and minority passengers in air travel. Social media platforms erupted with comments, shares, and hashtags supporting Jonathan's fight. Tweets poured in from all over the country, and soon, hashtags like #respect all passengers and #justice. For Jonathan began trending. People empathized with his quiet strength and the injustice he endured, many sharing their own similar experiences, creating a chorus of voices demanding change. Inside the high-rise offices of Asterion Dynamics, Jonathan sat at his desk, eyes fixed on the glowing screen showing live social media reactions. Despite the storm brewing online, his focus was unwavering. Each message of support was a small beacon of hope, but Jonathan knew that this was just the beginning. The backlash was already mounting on the other side. The two flight attendants most closely involved, Riley and Lucas, became targets of an angry, sometimes vitriolic response. Their social media accounts were flooded with hostile messages, some crossing the line into threats. The airline's legal and public relations teams scrambled to contain the fallout. Late one afternoon, Jonathan received a call from Daniel Crane, his lawyer. "They've placed Riley and Lucas on indefinite leave pending an internal investigation," Daniel reported, his tone steady but urgent. "The airline is clearly trying to show they're taking this seriously, at least on the surface." Jonathan nodded, even though Daniel couldn't see him. "Good, it's a start, but we need more than just lip service." His voice carried a mix of weariness and determination. He rubbed his crutches lightly against the floor, a quiet reminder of the battle still ahead. That same evening, as the city lights flickered on outside Jonathan's office windows, Daniel's phone buzzed with an unexpected message. It was from an anonymous source inside the airline, a whistleblower claiming there was a much deeper hidden culture of disrespect, bias, and systemic mistreatment aimed at disabled and minority passengers. The message contained snippets of internal emails, memos, and staff comments that exposed a troubling pattern, one that went beyond the isolated incident Jonathan faced. Daniel's eyebrows knit together as he read. He immediately called Jonathan. "This is bigger than we thought," he said quietly. "The system itself is rotten in places. We have insiders willing to help. This could change everything." Jonathan's mind raced. This revelation was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it could be the leverage they needed to force real change. On the other, it meant confronting a powerful institution willing to protect its secrets at any cost. His jaw tightened. "Then we have to be ready for what's coming. I didn't fight this hard to see it buried." The following days blurred into a whirlwind of media interviews, strategic meetings, and legal preparation. Jonathan became the face of a movement, though he never sought the spotlight. He remained stoic but approachable, aware that every word he spoke could inspire thousands or be twisted against him. He carefully balanced his public persona, firm but fair, victim yet warrior. Despite the growing public support, Jonathan felt the weight of scrutiny pressing down on him. Each headline, each comment, felt like a test of his resolve. Yet, beneath the surface, he found an unexpected strength in the solidarity emerging around him, from strangers, fellow advocates, and even unlikely allies within the airline. Marlon, the retired judge who had silently observed the flight, reached out with steady counsel. "The truth always finds a way to surface," Marlon said over coffee one afternoon, his voice calm but resolute. "You're lighting a fire, Jonathan, and sometimes when one light shines, it often reveals many shadows." The conference room in Daniel Crane's downtown law office buzzed with quiet urgency as Jonathan Briggs sat at the long mahogany table, surrounded by his legal team. The lawsuit was officially underway, marking the moment when his private grievance transformed into a public battle for justice. The airline's attorneys had sent over a settlement proposal that morning, an offer cloaked in corporate doublespeak, designed to hush the matter swiftly and quietly. But Jonathan's gaze was steady and unwavering as he reviewed the document. "No," he said firmly, folding the paper with deliberate care. "This isn't about money. It's about accountability, institutional change. We don't settle for silence." Daniel nodded approvingly, leaning forward with a confident, calm demeanor. "They're trying to avoid a trial to protect their reputation, but the evidence we have, the recordings, the witness testimonies, especially from our whistleblower, it's enough to bring the entire system under scrutiny. This case isn't just about you anymore, Jonathan. It's about a culture that's been allowed to fester unchecked." Jonathan's jaw tightened. The weight of that truth settled heavy on his shoulders. His injury throbbed faintly beneath his suit, a constant reminder of his vulnerability, yet also the source of his defiance. Over the past weeks, the strain of the legal battle had tested his physical endurance. His legs still ached, and some days, exhaustion pulled at his resolve like a tidal wave. Yet in moments like these, sitting amid piles of documents and strategy notes, his purpose burned brighter than the pain. The team moved methodically, preparing for the grueling process ahead. Internal emails from the airline's own staff, shared anonymously by the whistleblower, painted a damning picture. Casual jokes masking deep-seated biases, orders to suppress passenger complaints, and a tolerance for discriminatory behavior wrapped in the guise of customer service. As Daniel highlighted the most incriminating passages, Jonathan's eyes scanned each word carefully, imagining the courtroom scene to come. "These emails," he murmured. "They show everything, the rot beneath the surface." Outside the office's glass walls, the city's pulse went on obliviously, indifferent to the battle unfolding within. Jonathan's public image had begun to crystallize, seen by many as dignified and resolute, yet by others as stubborn or confrontational. The media buzzed with speculation. Social media swelled with divided opinions. He had gained supporters who admired his courage and critics who questioned his motives. Despite it all, Jonathan remained focused, refusing to let the noise distract him from the core mission. Late one evening, long after most had left, Jonathan sat alone in his office, the glow of his laptop casting sharp shadows on the walls. He massaged his aching leg and allowed himself a moment to reflect. The cost of this fight was becoming clear, not just physically but emotionally. Phone calls from concerned friends and family punctuated his solitude, voices urging him to rest, to consider a settlement. But surrender was not an option. "If I back down now," he thought, "what message would that send to everyone who has been silenced?" The courtroom loomed ahead like a battlefield where every word, every gesture would carry weight. Jonathan's thoughts flickered to the flight attendants who had mocked him, to the passengers who remained silent, to the countless others who might face similar indignities without ever speaking out. His fight had become theirs, and the stakes were immense. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. Daniel entered, his expression a mix of determination and concern. "Jonathan, we need to discuss the latest medical reports. Your injury is worsening, and the stress isn't helping. You have to pace yourself." Jonathan smiled faintly but shook his head. "I appreciate that, Daniel, but this fight demands more than strength. It requires sacrifice. If that moment made your blood boil and your heart ache, don't stay silent. Subscribe and become a member, because standing against disrespect is how we reclaim dignity." The media storm had already begun long before Jonathan set foot in the courtroom that morning. Headlines questioned his character and even his injury, casting shadows of doubt over his integrity. "Is Jonathan Briggs really the man he claims to be?" One article sneered, accompanied by grainy photos taken out of context. Another questioned if his limp was exaggerated for sympathy. As these stories spread, Jonathan sat alone in his quiet apartment, crutches leaning against the wall, a bitter weight settling in his chest. He stared at the latest headlines on his phone, feeling the sting of each accusation but refusing to let them break him. His focus remained razor-sharp. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for every person marginalized and dismissed by prejudice masked as policy. The airline's defense team pulled every dirty trick in the book. They planted rumors among industry insiders and social media, framing Jonathan as difficult, unstable, even litigious for the sake of attention. Their goal was clear: discredit the man who threatened to expose their toxic culture. But Jonathan had his own army. Daniel Crane, his trusted lawyer, met with him early that day, a firm hand on Jonathan's shoulder. "They're throwing everything at you, but your story is stronger. Stick to the truth. "It's the only thing that can't be taken away," Daniel said, his voice low but steady. Nearby, Marlin, the retired judge who had quietly supported Jonathan since the flight, nodded with quiet resolve. "Integrity is a light that no darkness can snuff out," he added. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Reporters whispered, cameras clicked, and Jonathan felt every pair of eyes weighing him down. Yet beneath the surface, a shift was about to occur, one that would tilt the balance in his favor in ways no one could have predicted. The defense team, confident in their strategy, called upon witnesses who repeated the company line that the flight crew's behavior was a harmless joke blown out of proportion. But their rehearsed testimonies lacked conviction, and the jury's interest waned. Then came the moment that silenced the room. Riley, the very flight attendant whose mockery had sparked much of Jonathan's ordeal, took the stand. His hands trembled slightly, betraying his nerves as he adjusted his tie and cleared his throat. I want to be honest," Riley began, eyes flickering with uncertainty. "What happened on that flight was wrong. The things we said, the way we acted, it was fueled by ignorance, not malice, but that doesn't excuse it." His voice wavered, raw with regret. "We treated Mr. Briggs unfairly. I'm sorry." The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Jonathan watched Riley carefully, noticing the genuine remorse etched on the young man's face. This was not the calculated testimony the defense had hoped for. Riley's admission struck like a thunderclap, unraveling their carefully constructed narrative. The airline's legal team exchanged nervous glances, their confidence shaken. Outside the courtroom, whispers spread rapidly. Reporters scrambled to update their stories, the narrative flipping overnight. Jonathan's supporters saw Riley's testimony as a breakthrough, a human moment breaking through layers of corporate denial. Yet Jonathan himself remained cautious, aware that this was only one battle in a much larger war. The road ahead would demand even greater resilience. In the quiet moments after the session, Daniel approached Jonathan. "This changes everything," he said, his tone a mix of relief and determination. "But don't let your guard down. They'll regroup, and the fight will get tougher." Jonathan nodded, steeling himself. "I'm ready. For every attack, there's a stronger truth waiting." As the courtroom emptied, Jonathan allowed himself a brief moment to breathe. The truth had pierced the shadows, but the war for justice was far from over. He knew the days ahead would be arduous, but with every step forward, he felt the tide turning. The walls that once seemed impenetrable were beginning to crack. Truth, when it escapes the shadows, can topple walls. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation as the judge called the session to order. Cameras clicked relentlessly from every corner, reporters scribbled furiously, and the hum of whispered conversations filled the room. Jonathan Briggs sat with a composed yet resolute expression, his crutches resting beside him. The moment had arrived. Taking a deep breath, he rose and approached the witness stand, the eyes of everyone present fixated on him. The weight of the ordeal pressed against his chest, but his voice was steady as he began recounting the flight that had changed everything. "I remember boarding the plane, eager to get home and focus on closing a critical deal," Jonathan said, his tone calm but tinged with the pain that still lingered. "But soon after, the flight attendants began whispering and laughing at my injury. It wasn't just ignorance, it was cruelty." His gaze swept over the jury, each word measured, carrying the quiet strength of a man who refused to be diminished. "I was mocked for something beyond my control. They questioned my integrity, my strength, even my leadership, all because of a broken leg." The room fell silent, the impact of his testimony palpable. The defense attorney tried to interject, but the judge raised a hand, allowing Jonathan to continue. "There was a moment during turbulence when one of the attendants bumped me, nearly causing me to fall. Instead of concern, I was met with disdain." Jonathan's jaw tightened as he recalled the memory, the sting of that moment still fresh. "It was more than disrespect. It was an attack on my dignity." Following Jonathan's testimony, Marlin, the retired judge and fellow passenger, took the stand. His voice carried the weight of years spent upholding justice. "I witnessed the flight crew's behavior firsthand," Marlin stated firmly, "and I can say with certainty that their conduct was unprofessional and discriminatory. This was not a case of isolated misunderstanding, but a pattern of disregard for a passenger's basic dignity." He adjusted his glasses, scanning the courtroom with a steady, unwavering gaze that commanded respect. "Such behavior, if left unchecked, sets a dangerous precedent." Next, the whistleblower, a quiet yet resolute figure, stepped forward. His face was shadowed under the courtroom lights, but his testimony was clear and devastating. He recounted the internal emails he had provided to Jonathan's legal team, messages that revealed a toxic work culture within the airline's crew, rife with bias and prejudice. The air grew heavier as the jury absorbed the damning evidence, a culture that tolerated mockery of disabled and minority passengers, policies ignored or twisted to shield those responsible. Video footage was presented next, grainy but undeniable. Clips captured flight attendants whispering and laughing, their faces smirking as they observed Jonathan's struggle. The judge leaned forward, eyebrows furrowed, clearly unsettled. "Is this truly the environment this airline condones?" he asked pointedly, turning to the defense table. The airline's lawyers scrambled to frame the incidents as isolated, unfortunate mistakes. "A few bad apples," they insisted, but Jonathan's legal team methodically dismantled this narrative. They pointed to the systemic nature of the problem, underscored by the emails, testimonies, and video evidence. One by one, their arguments chipped away at the defense's wall of denial. Jonathan felt the immense pressure, but his mind remained razor-sharp. Each piece of evidence was not just a battle won, but a step closer to justice for himself and countless others. He recalled the countless hours of preparation, the quiet support from Marlon, the courage of the whistleblower, all fueling his resolve. Despite his physical pain, Jonathan's presence in the courtroom was a beacon, a symbol of the emotional and societal wounds inflicted by prejudice. The judge's gaze shifted between both sides, his voice firm yet measured. "This court demands accountability," he declared, underscoring the seriousness of the moment. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the next move. As the day drew to a close, Jonathan lowered himself back into his seat. His legs ached, but inside, something stronger had awakened. He was no longer just a man with a broken leg, he was the face of a broader fight, a mirror reflecting pain shared by many who suffered in silence. Around him, the murmurs swelled, the weight of what had been revealed settling in. A single man's pain became a mirror for many. The courtroom fell into a hushed tension as the airline's lead attorney, Martin Caldwell, called his surprise witness to the stand. The man who stepped forward was not a low-level employee or a distant manager, but Nathaniel Carr, a senior executive whose polished suit and calm demeanor commanded immediate attention. Carr's gaze swept over the packed courtroom with an air of confident detachment, as if he carried the weight of the company's entire reputation on his shoulders. The judge nodded, signaling for Carr to begin his testimony. "I am unaware of any misconduct by the flight crew on the day in question," Carr declared in a steady voice, his tone carefully measured. "Our company has strict policies against discrimination. We enforce these policies rigorously, and any claims of mistreatment are investigated thoroughly." His words hung in the air, crafted to reassure the court and shift suspicion away from the airline's internal culture. Jonathan Briggs sat forward in his chair, his jaw clenched but expression unreadable. The cool professionalism of Carr's delivery belied the storm brewing beneath Jonathan's skin. Daniel Crane, his lawyer, remained calm but alert, sensing the critical moment approaching. He had prepared for this confrontation for weeks, digging deep into the airline's records and internal communications. When Carr's testimony paused, Daniel rose from his seat with deliberate purpose. His voice cut through the courtroom like a sharpened blade. "Mr. Carr, are you aware of these emails?" Daniel asked, sliding a stack of printed documents across the table toward the witness. Emails from senior management instructing flight supervisors to quietly suppress any passenger complaints involving crew misconduct, particularly those that might damage the company's image. Carr's confident facade flickered momentarily, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the pages. He swallowed hard, the faintest tremor betraying his composed exterior. I'm not sure these are authentic," he replied, voice faltering slightly. Daniel pressed on. "These emails are dated within the last 2 years and bear the signatures of multiple executives in your division, including yourself." He paused, letting the gravity of the accusation settle on everyone present. "Can you explain why these orders were given if your company's policy truly prohibits discrimination?" A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Jonathan's heart pounded as he watched Carr's expression shift from denial to the weight of unavoidable truth. The once impenetrable shield of corporate innocence was cracking under the light of undeniable evidence. The judge leaned forward, voice stern. "Mr. Carr, do you deny your involvement in orchestrating a deliberate cover-up?" Carr's gaze dropped to the floor. After a long moment, he exhaled sharply and said quietly, "I was following directives from above. The company prioritized protecting its reputation over individual complaints. It was a mistake. I regret it deeply." Jonathan felt a surge of vindication mixed with sorrow. This wasn't just about one flight or one crew's behavior. It was a systemic failure, rooted in decisions made at the highest levels. The fight for justice had grown far beyond what he imagined when he boarded that plane. As Carr stepped down, the courtroom buzzed with whispers of shock and disbelief. Jonathan's phone vibrated gently in his pocket. He glanced down to see a message from Riley, the very flight attendant whose crew had mocked him on the flight. The words on the screen caught him off guard. "Jonathan, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Thank you for standing strong." Jonathan's fingers lingered over the message, the weight of it sinking in. Despite the pain and humiliation, this small act of humility reminded him that change was possible, even from unlikely places. He looked up at the courtroom, where tension hung thick like a storm cloud ready to break. Daniel returned to his seat, eyes meeting Jonathan's with quiet determination. The battle was far from over, but this moment had shifted the ground beneath their opponent's feet. In that charged silence, the judge called the court to order, his voice steady and resolute. In the courtroom's cold light, truth and conscience clashed fiercely. Jonathan stood just outside the towering courthouse, the heavy weight of the day settling on his shoulders. His eyes scanned the throng of reporters and activists clustered near the entrance, their voices rising in a mix of determination and hope. The news cameras captured every moment, broadcasting his image into countless homes across the country. Jonathan had become more than just a man fighting for his own dignity. He was now a symbol for all those who had ever faced discrimination cloaked as customer service. Activists waved banners emblazoned with messages demanding equality and respect, while advocacy groups organized rallies to amplify the cause. It was a surge of momentum that Jonathan hadn't fully expected when he first boarded that plane months ago. His phone buzzed relentlessly, interviews, invitations to speak at panels, and messages from supporters flooding in. Jonathan's voice had become a beacon, resonating far beyond the confines of the courtroom. Yet beneath the applause and encouraging words, a darker reality crept in. Threatening emails began to arrive, and anonymous calls rattled his family's peace. He sat in his office late one evening, fingers tightening around the phone as he read a particularly chilling message. "Back off, or there will be consequences." The fear for his loved ones gnawed at him, a sharp contrast to the public figure standing firm under the spotlight. The balance between being a leader for change and protector of his private life became a precarious tightrope walk. Jonathan's close confidant and legal partner, Daniel Crane, paced beside him during one strategy meeting. "We knew this would bring scrutiny," Daniel said, his voice steady but laced with concern. "But these threats, they're escalating faster than we anticipated." Jonathan nodded, rubbing the bridge of his nose, exhaustion evident in his eyes. "I can't let them intimidate me. If anything, this has to strengthen our resolve." Daniel agreed, though the tension in the room was palpable. Each day brought a new test of endurance, not just in the courtroom but in the constant public arena where every move was dissected. Meanwhile, behind closed doors at the airline's gleaming headquarters, a different kind of battle was unfolding. The executive boardroom buzzed with urgent discussion as senior leaders scrambled to contain the growing backlash. "We need a public relations strategy that shows we're taking this seriously," one executive urged, tapping through slides of glossy ad campaigns and promises of improved customer experience. Yet, beneath the surface, the company resisted real reform. A seasoned crisis manager warned, "True change is costly and risky. Let's focus on quick fixes, training seminars, mandatory sensitivity sessions, a few public statements, and hope the outrage dies down." The room nodded in uneasy agreement. Superficial gestures were safer than admitting systemic flaws. Unbeknownst to the public, Jonathan's legal team uncovered a trove of internal communications revealing the company's deliberate attempt to spin the narrative rather than address root problems. Late nights in a cramped office filled with stacks of printed emails and highlighted passages, Daniel and his associates pieced together a damning picture. One memo bluntly advised, control the message tightly. Avoid admitting fault. Emphasize isolated incidents. Another outlined plans for consultants hired specifically to shape public perception and mitigate potential reputational damage. Jonathan stared at the documents, a mixture of anger and resolve hardening within him. "They're not just ignoring the problem, they're burying it," he muttered. At a public forum where Jonathan spoke passionately, his voice echoed through the hall filled with engaged listeners. "This isn't just about me," he declared, eyes scanning the crowd. "It's about every person who's been dismissed, marginalized, or humiliated under the guise of service. We demand accountability, not just apologies, but real change." The room erupted in applause, but Jonathan knew the real fight was just beginning. The airline's attempts to placate critics with empty promises were a smokescreen, and the shadows of resistance still loomed large. As night fell, Jonathan sat alone in his study, the glow of his laptop illuminating his determined face. The threats outside and the company's deception only fueled his determination to keep pressing forward. He understood that public support was vital, but so was unmasking the deeper corruption that enabled such discrimination to persist. His mind raced through the next steps: legal maneuvers, public outreach, coalition building, all necessary to dismantle the entrenched barriers. In the stillness, a quiet resolve settled over him. He wasn't just fighting for himself, or even for his family. This was a battle for dignity and respect that touched countless lives, hidden behind polite smiles and scripted apologies. The road ahead would be long, fraught with challenges that tested every ounce of his strength. Yet Jonathan felt ready. He would keep pushing, exposing every lie and demand true reform, no matter the cost. Because sometimes, the loudest uproar only masks the deepest secrets, and Jonathan was determined to tear through the noise and reveal the truth beneath. The louder the roar, the deeper the cover-up. The courtroom hummed with an almost unbearable silence as Jonathan Briggs sat poised, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the witness stand. His sharp eyes scanned the room, lawyers pacing, jurors leaning forward, the judge reviewing notes with an intense focus. The final hearing had arrived, the moment he and Daniel Crane had painstakingly prepared for, a culmination of months of relentless battle. Daniel sat beside him, a calm but determined figure, his fingers steepled as he whispered, "This is it, Jonathan. We deliver everything here." Jonathan nodded slightly, the weight of the day pressing on his broken leg, the constant reminder of his injury sharpening his resolve rather than dulling it. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Every person in that chamber sensed the stakes. This wasn't just about compensation or a single act of disrespect anymore. It was about demanding change from an institution that had long hidden behind corporate facades and hollow apologies. Jonathan's mind was razor-focused as he mentally rehearsed the core of his argument. He would demand a court-ordered overhaul of the airline's entire training program, an unflinching structural reform to root out discrimination. No more lip service, no more backroom deals. This was the turning point. When the judge finally called the courtroom to order, the murmurs faded to a heavy stillness. Jonathan rose, each movement careful, measured. His crutches, polished and familiar, were his steadfast support. As he approached the center of the room, every eye fixed on him, some skeptical, others quietly hopeful. The gallery of onlookers, journalists, and advocates sat tense, hanging on the moment. Jonathan took a deep breath, steadying his voice before speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone both firm and earnest, "this case is not only about me, it is about every person who has ever been belittled, ignored, or discriminated against simply for being different." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I ask this court not just to award compensation for my suffering, but to mandate meaningful, enforceable reforms in the airline's policies. Training programs that educate, protect, and respect passengers of all backgrounds and abilities, policies that hold employees accountable and create a culture of dignity and inclusion." His words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The jurors exchanged glances. The airline's attorneys stiffened in their seats. Jonathan's voice grew steadier, more impassioned, as he detailed the vision he and Daniel had crafted, an end to silence and neglect, a path toward justice not only for him, but for countless others who had suffered in silence. "Furthermore," Jonathan continued, "I intend to use a portion of any settlement to establish a nonprofit dedicated to fighting disability and racial discrimination in travel. This is about changing lives beyond this courtroom, about transforming an industry." The courtroom walls seemed to pulse with the significance of his speech. Jonathan's gaze swept the room, resting briefly on Daniel, who nodded approvingly. The judge's expression was inscrutable, but Jonathan could sense the gravity of the moment. He felt the cool press of his crutches beneath his hands, a reminder of the very real pain and endurance behind his cause. As he concluded, his voice softened yet retained its compelling power. When justice speaks, silence must listen. The courtroom was thick with anticipation, the heavy silence hanging over the chamber like a tangible weight. Jonathan sat rigid in his chair, hands clasped tightly in his lap, eyes fixed on the jury as the foreman rose to deliver their verdict. Outside, the gathered crowd of journalists, supporters, and airline representatives held their breath, the tension palpable. For hours, the jurors had deliberated, discussing evidence, testimonies, and the deeply rooted issues the case had exposed. Now, all awaited justice in the form of a unanimous decision. The foreman's voice cut through the stillness, steady but firm. "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Jonathan Briggs." A collective intake of breath rippled through the room, followed by a hushed murmur. Jonathan felt his heart pounding in his chest, a mix of relief and disbelief washing over him. The long, grueling battle, marked by doubt, opposition, and relentless determination, had reached a turning point. The judge continued, "The defendant, Aeroglide Airlines, is hereby ordered to pay substantial damages to the plaintiff and to implement the reforms mandated by this court to prevent such discrimination in the future." The words hung heavy in the air, a decisive blow against years of systemic neglect and injustice. Jonathan's eyes flickered to Daniel, his lawyer, who gave a subtle nod, pride etched across his face. Around them, the courtroom's atmosphere shifted, a quiet acknowledgement of victory, but also of the work that lay ahead. Outside the courtroom, the news spread like wildfire. The ruling sent shockwaves through the airline industry and beyond, igniting a spark of hope for others who had suffered in silence. Calls came flooding in, from advocacy groups, fellow victims, and media outlets, all praising the verdict as a landmark moment in the fight against discrimination. Jonathan, despite the praise, remained grounded. He knew this was not the end. The victory was a critical milestone, but the battle for real change was just beginning. Later that evening, in the privacy of a small, warmly lit room reserved for close allies, Jonathan sat across from Marlon, the retired judge who had silently supported him throughout the ordeal. Marlon's eyes shone with admiration as he reached across the table and clasped Jonathan's hand firmly. "You didn't just win a case," Marlon said, his voice low but powerful. "You changed the rules of the game." Jonathan felt the weight of those words sink in, an acknowledgement not just of his personal victory, but of the larger ripple effect he had created. Jonathan's expression softened, a faint smile breaking through the exhaustion etched into his features. "It wasn't easy," he admitted quietly, eyes steady and sincere, "but knowing that this could help others makes every fight worth it." Marlon nodded, understanding the complex mix of relief, pride, and cautious hope radiating from his friend. As the night deepened, Jonathan gazed out the window toward the city skyline, lights twinkling like distant promises. His mind raced ahead to the challenges yet to come, ensuring the airline truly followed through, building his nonprofit, and continuing the advocacy that now felt more urgent than ever. Despite everything, there was a quiet determination burning inside him, a steadfast resolve to push forward no matter the obstacles. In that moment, Jonathan realized that victory was not the end, but the beginning of a new journey, one filled with hope, responsibility, and the chance to rewrite the story for countless others who faced similar battles. With a deep breath, he settled into the weight of this new chapter, ready to meet whatever lay ahead with courage and conviction. Victory is not the end, but a new beginning. Jonathan's footsteps echoed softly on the polished marble floor of the newly renovated airport lounge. He moved steadily, supported by his crutches, the familiar weight of them grounding him with each step. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and polished wood, a stark contrast to the sterile environment he had once dreaded. Today, the lounge felt different. It was a symbol of change, a tangible marker of the battle he had fought and the victories earned not just for himself, but for countless others who had suffered in silence. As he settled into a sleek leather chair by the expansive window overlooking the tarmac, Jonathan's gaze drifted toward a group of airline crew members seated across the room. They were engaged in what appeared to be a sensitivity training session, their instructor speaking earnestly about respect, empathy, and inclusion. Jonathan's eyes softened as he watched the men listen attentively, their postures more open, their expressions thoughtful. This was no longer a dismissive culture. Here was an effort to educate, to reform. It was a victory carved out of months of relentless struggle, legal battles, and personal sacrifice. Jonathan flexed his fingers over the worn handle of his crutches, a symbol he had chosen to keep even after his leg had healed. To others, they might represent limitation or injury, but to Jonathan, they told a story of endurance and strength. He reflected quietly on how far he had come, from the flight where those very crutches made him a target of scorn and mockery, to this moment of quiet triumph. The journey had tested every fiber of his being, yet it had forged something stronger within him. A soft voice interrupted his reverie. "Mr. Briggs?" It was Daniel Crane, his trusted lawyer and steadfast ally throughout the ordeal. Daniel's eyes held a mixture of pride and determination. "The nonprofit you started is already making waves. We're hearing from people across the country, disabled travelers, minority passengers, sharing stories that mirror yours. They're finding hope because of you." Jonathan nodded, a faint smile breaking the calm on his face. "It's more than I imagined when we first filed that complaint." His voice carried a quiet strength, but beneath it lay the weariness of the fight. "There's still so much work ahead, but seeing this, it makes the struggle worth it." Daniel glanced toward the training session. "It's not just about policies anymore. It's about changing hearts and minds. This is progress." Jonathan leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing as a flicker of concern passed through him. "Progress, yes, but I wonder how deep it goes. Sometimes these changes feel like a show for the public, rather than a true transformation." His voice was steady but laced with caution. "We have to remain vigilant." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden announcement over the lounge's speaker system calling passengers to their flights. The hum of activity shifted as travelers rose and prepared to leave. Jonathan rose with them, muscles tightening slightly in response to the movement. A younger crew member approached hesitantly. "Mr. Briggs," the man said, voice respectful, "I just wanted to thank you. Ever since your case, I've started questioning how we treat passengers with disabilities. It's opened my eyes." Jonathan studied the young man's earnest expression and nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you. That means more than you know. Change starts with people like you willing to see things differently." As the man walked away, Jonathan felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path had been long, tangled with setbacks and moments of doubt, but here in this place, surrounded by signs of reform and newfound respect, a fragile hope blossomed. Looking down at his crutches once more, he allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. They had been his burden, his target, and now his emblem of victory. Reflecting on the ordeal, Jonathan felt gratitude for the allies who stood by him and the unexpected twists that shaped his path. His story was now one of hope, resilience, and change. Sometimes the strongest steps are taken on crutches. They laughed too soon, because justice was already in motion. If you stand for strength, respect, and accountability, hit subscribe and join the channel. Together, we rise. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It addresses themes of prejudice, resilience, and accountability in the face of discrimination. This narrative aims to raise awareness and inspire reflection on standing up against injustice.